BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, a new national forest for the west of England. But let's start with one of the most unusual places I've visited for this programme, a cannabis farm in the British countryside. It's not what you're imagining. This is a high-tech £26 million greenhouse which is licensed by the Home Office to grow medicinal cannabis for the pharmaceutical industry. And as I found out, its technology means it can harvest 52 weeks of the year. We're in a corridor, and as you heard, a trapdoor opened in the wall to reveal a pink-lit room. On one side we have cannabis plants which I'd say are about the size of my hand. On the other, they're maybe the size of my arm. And then the mother plants in the far distance really here are enormous. With me is Richard Lewis, who runs this place.
So this is where the young cannabis plants are produced. They then move on to grow into a flowering plant. Over to our far side you can see what we call mother plants. From those we clone, so we have genetically identical plants. We are producing young clones every week. We're transmitting them from one zone to another every week, and we're harvesting every day. So it is a continuous plant process.
Somebody's just walked past us dressed in blue scrubs with nitrile gloves on, and honestly we could be in a hospital, not in a growing situation, because the atmosphere is not one of farming somehow, is it?
Yeah, it has to be more sterile because of that medical aspect to it.
Also with us is James Duckenfield, who's the CEO here. James, let's go back a step. How on earth did this place come to exist?
We noticed that the UK medical cannabis market was really being underserved. So all the medical cannabis was being imported for unlicensed medicines. And there were all sorts of problems with quality, inconsistency, with mould, there were recalls, and we thought there must be a better way of doing it. So we looked to create a business that could really provide a dependable source of medical cannabis. And we've built what I think is a world-class facility that can compete against the best of them.
Let's talk about who you're serving, because you can't, unless in vanishingly rare circumstances, get this sort of medicine on the NHS, can you?
No, there's literally a handful of people on the NHS that have got a licensed medicine prescription. So this is private medicine at the moment. There's around 50,000 patients using medical cannabis at the moment.
What claims are you legally allowed to make for it then? What can you say that it can do?
We make no medical claims whatsoever. So we're providing a raw material to a specials manufacturer. The specials manufacturer then turns it into a cannabis-based medicine for medicinal use in humans, is the technical description. And it's down to the physician to prescribe that special medicine. The types of ailment that medical cannabis is prescribed for chronic pain, anxiety, MS, sometimes epilepsy.
And yet NICE, who regulate all this here in the UK, don't allow this yet.
No, so NICE reviewed cannabis-based medicines back in 2019, so just after legalisation, and came to the conclusion that more research needed to be done. And they also said that there wasn't an economic case for it to be prescribed on the NHS. So actually last year we funded a rerun of that health economic analysis at York University, and it showed that actually were it to be prescribed on the NHS, then it could potentially save the NHS about £4 billion a year.
Although you would say that, wouldn't you?
Although I would say that, wouldn't I? Yes. I mean, obviously I've got a vested interest, but nevertheless, you know, the thing that keeps us going every day is the anecdotal evidence that's coming back from patients. The market here is growing quickly, and we think that when the market's mature in this country and doctors become comfortable with it and it becomes less stigmatised, there could be as many as 2 million genuine medical users of cannabis in this country.
And you can hear more about the cannabis farm on this weekend's On Your Farm. That goes out on Sunday morning at 6:30 here on BBC Radio 4, or available at a more humane time on BBC Sounds. Now, to the vexed issue of biosecurity at our borders. As we've been reporting recently, port health authorities have warned that the post-Brexit checking system isn't working. Well, as part of our week looking at biosecurity from farms to borders, I spoke to Tim Bage. He sits on the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health's Port Health Expert panel and told me there isn't enough money and the system's under pressure.
The system has been sort of designed by DEFRA and other central government stakeholders, and it was designed after the previous iteration was binned in July 2022. I think that was the fourth false start that we had. You know, there should have been more co-design in the system we've got now, and we could have been given more time to test the border target operating model.
Is it working? We've heard an awful lot of criticism about it, particularly from places like Dover.
Sure.
Is it working?
I mean, look, I think where the BTOM is concerned, it's still a work in progress. Myself and others had previously pointed out a number of flaws in the model, which are unfortunately now manifesting themselves. The lower check rates, for example, under the new model, just meant that many border control posts were built with the port infrastructure funding that was made available by the previous government, but they now find themselves oversized, with port operators wondering what to do with them. There are then lower throughput ports that find themselves in a situation where the money that they make off operating the system around bringing in imported food and feed, they're not covering the cost of operating the BCP, both in staffing, heating, lighting, all the rest of it.
What's the BCP?
Border control post. You know, some port health authorities can't cover the staff costs with the volume of checks that they'd be expected to perform. Because of that, theoretically, a single check, if costed properly, could end up something around about £500, but clearly they're under pressure to remain competitive, and as such financial holes are emerging in already stretched local government budgets. And whilst the model sort of stands or falls on funding, you probably could have given me all the riches in the free world this time last year, and I would not have been able to recruit the professional staff required at the border. And that's because there's been no coherent national border staffing strategy, and that should have emerged with urgency after Brexit. Recruitment and retention has been a huge challenge, and I think will continue to be so.
And this comes at a tricky time right now for farming, because we've got African swine fever and foot and mouth in Europe. And there are real concerns about those two diseases, just to pick on two, actually getting into this country.
Yeah, there is. And look, you know, there are other problems with the model, such as, you know, the imports from the EU are subject to checks on the East Coast, but not on the West Coast at the moment. There are issues with systems that are meant to ensure that goods called for inspection at inland border control posts, not the ones on the border, but the ones inland, and don't always do so. And, you know, there are imports that will have missed checks at the border, but they're not a priority for inland environmental health food safety teams, whose focus has to be on the food hygiene inspection programme of the restaurants and takeaways that we all use every week.
Just in a more general sense, is what's needed a new system, or actually more funding, or maybe both?
I think we need to continue to develop the system that we've got, and I think it does need to be better funded. The Borders programme at DEFRA is being wound up, and we'll end up with a situation where we're at a business as usual state, and I question whether there will be enough people there to do the amount of work that needs to be done. So certainly, you know, if secretaries of state are listening in, more funding I think is needed to fix some of the things that need fixing in the model.
Tim Bage. We asked DEFRA about this. They told us they're not complacent about illegal meat smuggling and are working closely with other government departments and border agencies to tackle the issue. That preventing an outbreak of African swine fever remains a key biosecurity priority, and that the government will do whatever it takes to protect farmers from foot and mouth. DEFRA also told us they're taking a pragmatic approach to the phasing of controls on imports from the EU, and that port health authorities have robust procedures for following up with businesses importing animal products where consignments do not show up for inspection as required. England is to have a new national forest. It'll be planted across Bristol, Wiltshire, Gloucestershire and Somerset and called the Western Forest. It's the first national forest for 30 years, following the Midlands National Forest, and will be created by the same team, working alongside the Forest of Avon, a community woodland. Rosie Walker from the Woodland Trust welcomed the news.
This gives us a real opportunity to work at a fantastic landscape scale in a new part of the country. We need long-term grants just like this one at big scales to enable us to carry on doing this so that we can bring some clarity and some certainty to landowners. And it also needs to come with that advice as well. So that's what this whole bid has brought together for that region.
Well, the government's promised 3 new national forests and is putting £7.5 million towards this one, with the aim of planting 2,500 hectares of woodland by 2030 and more by 2050. National Forest Chief Executive John Everett told me it won't be created at the expense of farmland.
We're looking to create about half of that as woodland and about half of it as agroforestry. And so, yes, a good chunk of it will be supporting farming in different ways, some of it by looking at improving production through agroforestry, but then also in the margins to protect soils, to put trees in hedgerows, to protect watercourses, and to promote diversification. So I think at least half of it's going to be through that route, and some of the other planting will be on obviously the least productive land. And that's what's happened here in the National Forest in the Midlands also.
So you're not envisaging this as taking over large amounts of farmland, more that you'll use more trees in a landscape?
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the things we need to really make sure we get across to our farmers and landowners. Certainly what's happened here in the Midlands is we've been able to make sure that we protect our best soils and we keep people farming. It's not about replacing farming. It's actually about helping farming into the future and helping the transition of farming into the kinds of things that can help us adapt to climate change in particular.
You've got £7.5 million from the government over 5 years. So you're going to need more money. Where's that going to come from?
Yeah, I think it will be a real mix. I think some of it will come through the private sector, through the planning process, and we hope to have really strong planning policies that can provide woods and trees on the back of new development. So
this would be BNG money, biodiversity net gain?
Yeah, some through those sorts of routes, and then other private finance through things like carbon monies will come in. Also a significant proportion of charitable giving and other donations, and of course business support.
We are not good at planting trees in this country. We miss our targets with tedious regularity. How are you going to get round that? How are you going to be successful where we haven't been in the past?
The point of this new national forest is it's building on more than 30 years of experience of what's happened here in the Midlands with our work. And that's very much a partnership programme with all kinds of public, private, voluntary, community sector. And we have hit our targets here. We've gone from 6% to 25% tree and forest cover in that time, and actually integrated that into the landscape. Yeah, I agree. We haven't necessarily hit our government targets, but we have accelerated tree planting hugely over the last 5 years. And I think that's absolutely good news for what we want to do next.
Part of that has just been practical things, hasn't it? You know, finding the trees to plant and finding the people to plant them. Have we got over the problems that we did have a few years ago with that?
I think some of the difficulties are getting resolved with the supply chain, with the certainty of the marketplace working, with the skills. But we do still have a lag phase that we need to catch up on. So we don't have enough foresters out there. We don't have enough contracting organisations out there with the skills that are needed. I think part of this programme is actually about increasing that training, making sure that we can grow the skills we need, expanding our small contracting businesses so they can all grow, getting bigger kit out into the landscape to do the jobs that are needed. I think that's all for the good. We're trying to create a long-term venture with the forest. You know, you have to think centuries ahead, not just decades. And you have to grow the infrastructure that means that you can use that forest, benefit from it. So, yeah, it's very holistic in the way we want to work. And that's what gives you all the benefits.
John Everett from the National Forest. That's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Rebecca Rooney. And Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.